In 2008, the Detroit Lions went 0-16. We talk about how they got there and what happened afterward this week on Remarkable Teams. Thank you very, very much for listening, guys. This is the first episode of Remarkable Teams, although I am releasing 3 episodes at once, so maybe you're listening to this one third and you're like, why is it way worse than the other 2? My name is Dylan Gott. I am a stand-up comedian, or I was, before a pandemic destroyed that profession. So now I want to talk about my favorite types of sports teams of all time. There's 3 types of teams I really think are amazing and worth talking about. The first, of course, is what we'll be talking about this week, one of the worst teams of all time, the Detroit Lions. Then, of course, you have the best teams of all time. In one part of these 3 episodes, we'll be talking about the 1971-1972 Los Angeles Lakers. And the third type of team, they didn't necessarily win anything. They didn't lose too many games either. They're just fucking cool, and they change the game in a positive way. And the example of that team we'll be using in these first 3 sets of episodes is the Seattle Mariners from 1995. So without any further ado, let's start talking about these 2008 Detroit Lions. A little bit of history in the Detroit Lions. They started in 1930 as the Portsmouth Spartans. It's great how every sports team, before they were in a huge city like New York or Chicago, they were always in like, this is the Illinois Fighting Catholics, and then their logo was just a horrible, horrible racist image. So in 1934, the Portsmouth Spartans were moved to Detroit and renamed the Lions because all of the team names were available. They picked Lions. That's a solid name. The Lions have won 4 NFL championships. Notice I didn't say any Super Bowls. The last championship being in 1957. Now, if any team is shitty for a really long time, usually there's some sort of mythical curse that affects them. Like you think about the Red Sox and Babe Ruth. There's other ones that I can't think of offhand that would have been good to remember. But the 1957 team, the last team to win the title, was led by Bobby Lane, who also got them back-to-back titles in 1952 and 1953. He was then traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers and cursed to the Detroit Lions to be sold to a guy who wasn't a good owner. That's right, in 1961, 4 years off of their title. They must have been flying high. The Lions were the fucking Patriots of the 50s. Can you imagine things going bad with the Patriots? Well, they're bought by William Clay Ford Sr., the Detroit Lions are. Of course, the grandson of Henry Ford, son of Edsel Ford, for $4.5 million. The Ford family still obviously are controlling interests in the Ford Motor Company. And you can have, obviously, the person that starts a company is very smart, and then their son or their daughter can usually be almost as smart as their father or their mother. But then once you start diluting that, it just gets dumber and dumber as we get down. And I don't know much about business. I know you guys are shocked. Like, wait a minute. A guy whose first thought during a pandemic was to make a fucking podcast isn't good at business. But William Clay Ford, in what we would all want from our boss, is way too loyal. And that is pretty much the story of the Detroit Lions. William Clay Ford Sr. served on the board of Ford. Ooh, fun to say that. Board of Ford for 57 years. His son, William Jr., is now the CEO. Here's the problem. He's too loyal. So Russ Thomas, who actually was an assistant coach on that final 1957 NFL championship winning Detroit Lions team, is hired as the general manager in 1967 by old Bill Ford. Now, he only had 1 winning season in 22 fucking years as the general manager. That was in 1970, and that was he didn't only have 1 winning season, I apologize. They had 4 winning seasons. They made it to the playoff once, and that was in 1970. 1 playoff turn in 22 years. Thomas was so cheap that he would actually draft players for the Detroit Lions over his tenure as GM, but didn't offer them enough money, so they just signed with another league. So you remember 1967, we're talking about the AFL merger is in 1970, so we're talking about this guy drafted Fred Biletnikoff and then just didn't pay him enough, so he went to the Raiders in the AFL. So this guy's actively basically legitimizing another week. He actually did that with 3 other Hall of Famers as well. Fred Biletnikoff's just the most famous one. He almost did this. This is his final year. Crazy. His final year with the team, he almost did this with Barry Sanders, who was threatening to go to the CFL. But then on the last day, I think the season had started at this point, they actually signed Barry Sanders. And they were like, well, if he's not practicing, he didn't practice with the team, but he'll play. And then Barry Sanders was immediately amazing. And then everyone looked at each other and went, all right, I think we got to fire this weird guy. Then the reign of Chuck Schmidt. Chuck Schmidt is the Bill Belichick of the Detroit Lions, because Chuck Schmidt, in 11 years as general manager of the Detroit Lions, had 6 winning seasons in the 90s, baby. 6 fucking winning seasons. Fuck yeah. He's the best general manager in the history of the Detroit Lions. If you look at the Detroit Lions all-time team, it's so depressing. Because I'm a 35-year-old man. I grew up. I'm a Chicago Bears fan, admittedly. And growing up, I watched those Lions teams where it was like Barry Sanders and then Scott Mitchell, sometimes throwing 6 touchdowns, sometimes throwing 6 interceptions. Herman Moore. Great teams on offense. And that's their all-time team, is like, there's quarterback who sometimes had bad days. A bipolar quarterback. Is Scott Mitchell starting today? No, he got sad because he saw too much of the color yellow. So Scott Mitchell will be crying on the sidelines, and Rodney Pete's your starter. But enough of this fucking bullshit, because Chuck Schmidt, he steps down as GM and president of the Lions. And in his place, president and general manager Matt Millen. Matt Millen is hired by old Bill Ford Sr., Bill Clay Ford Sr., sorry. When you're rich enough, you got to pronounce that fucking middle name. Bill Clay Ford Sr. Hires Matt Millen. He's the president and GM. Matt Millen, when offered the job, said, I don't know if I'm qualified for this. Bill said, you'll figure it out. He's the GM from 2001 to 2008. Hires Steve Mariucci. This is his big move. Hires Steve Mariucci. Gives Steve Mariucci 5-year, $25 million deal. Mariucci went 15-28 before being fired in his 3rd season. 2 years into his reign, Matt Millen, beautiful Matt Millen, called Johnny Morton a homophobic slur on the sidelines. And Johnny Morton said, what? And Matt Millen said, oopsie doopsie. Think about this. Lions fans, if this happens in 2013, let's say Matt Millen gets hired in 2011 and then calls someone a terrible slur 2 years into his reign, you get rid of Matt Millen in 2 years. But instead, since it was the early 2000s and everyone had that fucking dippity-doo in their hair and they wore a visor that was just completely sideways, and walking down the street in 2003 for old people must have been like I assume it's bad now, because everyone's annoyed by things young people do, but 2003 must have been like just old men wanting to punch every young man in the face. But you got the fucking visor on sideways, you know? And no one cared about terrible slurs back then. So lucky for Matt Millen, because he got to keep making his team. The year before, the Detroit Lions were 9-7, and that was the last time they did that for a while. That is, have a winning season. The year before they hired Matt Millen, they were 9-7, and that was the last time because Matt Millen never had a winning season. The closest he got to a winning season was when they went 7-9 in 2007. You guessed it, the year before he got fired. And the year before that, winning season, of course. The losing season. I'm a bimbo. The legacy of Matt Millen. You guys are wondering, how did he get so shit? Well, here's some help. Let's go through the draft picks of Matt Millen. His first draft pick was an offensive lineman. We're going to go with the first round draft picks. I'm not going 6 rounds deep, by the way. First time he had a draft pick was number 18 in the draft, Jeff Backus. He picks an offensive lineman, which the Lions historically have had bad offensive lines, so whatever, right? Jeff Backus, number 18, didn't really pan out. All right, pro, but didn't really pan out. The next year, they have the 3rd pick. They draft Joey Harrington. Now, this wasn't a particularly strong draft, so you take a big swing. And a quarterback in the NFL really is a 4-year commitment because it's it's the most high pressure. It's one of the most high pressure, obviously, positions in pro sports. So you need to learn the offense. You need to get used to the speed of the game. So it takes you a couple years to learn how to become a quarterback. And the Lions don't have a good offensive line. So Joey Harrington's just dropping back and getting choke slammed every single week. But you got Joey Harrington, so the next year you get him some fucking receivers. Who do they get? Charles Rogers at number 2. Now you can look at this, and this is a bad draft because I don't think this one is talked about too much, but Charles Rogers gets injured. He was an okay player, but then he got injured, so that's whatever. But the problem with that is Andre Johnson was drafted immediately after. Andre Johnson, of course, a Hall of Fame wide receiver. He's drafted by the Texans. And Andre Johnson was such a good wide receiver that he actually caught passes from like a million different quarterbacks. He had Matt Schaub for sure at some point, but number 7 the next year is Roy Williams. Now, Roy Williams was an all-pro player. We'll talk a little bit of Roy Williams because he was, of course, on that shitty fucking team, the 2008 Detroit Lions, but Ben Roethlisberger is drafted number 11. So that's not good. Widely known as the worst pick of Matt Millen's tenure, Mike Williams. Mike Williams was drafted number 10 in the 2005 NFL Draft. Now, why was Mike Williams such a bad pick? Because he tried to declare for the draft in 2004. He was blocked. They went to the courts, blah, blah, blah. He wasn't allowed to play football for a full year. He didn't play professional football. He couldn't even practice with his college team because of these lawsuits about him trying to come out of college early. So he would have been a first-round pick the previous year, but not this year. They draft him at number 10 still. Fuck it. But he's one of those guys. He should have gone later in the draft, obviously, because he kind of, it's like a little bit of a pizza, you know? Sometimes the pizza's ready, but then it gets cold. DeMarcus Ware is drafted right after. Aaron Rodgers is, of course, also drafted in this first round. Now, this is where it gets weird because Matt Millen, obviously, like everyone who is shitty at their job, has excuses. One of his excuses is he listened to too many people around him making picks for him because he was like, I really like DeMarcus Ware. But you know what? Everyone's telling me Mike Williams, so I'll draft Mike Williams. That could be true, but there's so many GMs and so many coaches in pro sports who go, you know what? I had the first pick in that draft, and I thought, this Tom Brady kid, even though he was splitting time with another quarterback at Michigan, he should be the number 1 pick. The next year, 2006, they draft Ernie Sims. He's a linebacker at number 9. He had a promising career until it was derailed by injuries because football is made for concussions. The final draft pick, and I think this is a pretty good way to leave off, was Megatron, one of the best wide receivers I've ever seen in my short life, Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson was a shoe-in pick at number 2. I mean, you don't really need much scouting to be like, hey, who's that guy who's dragging all 11 players into the end zone and just spiked it standing up? Oh, I think I'll draft that guy. But a real fun story coming out of this draft was that Al Davis and Matt Millen were talking before the draft. And since you don't really need to be strategic, I guess Matt Millen thought so. He just said, oh yeah, we're going to take Calvin Johnson number 2. And Al Davis, of course, took Jamarcus Russell because he's crazy. Al Davis took Jamarcus Russell, and there is a world where Al Davis goes, actually, that Calvin Johnson guy is pretty good, drafts Megatron, and then the Detroit Lions somehow go worse than 0-16 because they have Jamarcus Russell as their quarterback. Now, I know you're thinking, like, 7 years, this guy's this bad in this new media environment? How did he stay? Because William Clay Ford doesn't fucking fire people. This guy, after 5 losing seasons, got a contract extension. That's when this Fire Matt Millen campaign starts in earnest. They would throw people out of the stadium for having Fire Millen signs. There were websites dedicated to this. There were protests organized. People showed up with signs. Something you only do. It's like, only if you want to change a fucking law do you do this. But in Detroit, they were like, you know what? No one has a job. Houses are $2,000. The biggest problem we have is Matt Millen. Can't I just be happy with something? It gets weird, though, because Bill Clay Ford Sr. wants him out. His son, loves him. Junior wants him out. And Junior starts making statements in the press going, if it was up to me, I would fire him. Closing thoughts on Matt Millen. In a study done by Jeff Frere of the 90 NFL GMs, this is just one study. I don't know how it was done. I don't know how it was done, but it does show a point. It's one of those studies where everyone's like, you know what? I like football and math. Let's apply some weird math to football, and they get one solid number, and someone asks you, oh, how'd you get that one solid number? That's really apt to show the ability of these GMs, and then he starts telling you, and your nose starts to bleed, and you have a stroke because you have no idea what he's saying. But Jeff Frere of the 90 NFL GMs, he had this study. It was 2002 to 2015. There were 90 NFL GMs. Matt Millen was 89th. Al Davis was last. Here's the other thing about Matt Millen. He was a middle-aged man during this time, prime of his life. Al Davis was just a liver spot who genuinely every year with his first overall pick, he tried to draft Bo Jackson. He's like, I don't think the kid's done. Get him some robot legs and let's go. So really, he was the worst GM because I don't think it should count. It should also not be allowed if you're the owner and GM. Like Jerry Jones has made some bad decisions as GM of the Cowboys, but he's going to make some amazing decisions in 10 years. He's just going to be like, get me Roger Staubach's corpse, kill Troy Aikman, let's combine them, let's draft him first. Something that doesn't get a lot of play is the actual sideline coaches, the coordinators for the Detroit Lions. Now, let's talk about the offensive coordinator for these Detroit Lions, Jim Coletto. Brief overview, Jim Coletto was an offensive coordinator at Purdue, where he also coached Arizona State, Ohio State, and was his last offensive coordinator position before his time with the Detroit Lions was at Notre Dame in the 1990s. The only time he was an offensive coordinator in the NFL was this year, and he immediately retired forever. That's according to Wikipedia. Who knows? Maybe he's the offensive coordinator, not even the coach. He's the offensive coordinator for a high school team. He was an offensive line coach for a long time before that, for the Lions, of course, and for the Baltimore Ravens. So they are promoting within the organization that doesn't win a lot. The defensive coordinator was Joe Barry. Now, you're probably thinking the offense was the problem with this. The defense, historically shitty, the Detroit Lions defense. Joe Barry's 37 when he gets the job. He was a defensive coordinator for 2 years under Rod Marinelli, and he was a linebackers coach before that. His only time in the NFL really was a linebackers coach and then a defensive coordinator. His defensive coordinator career in the NFL to this point, we will talk about him afterwards, but to this point was 2007 and 2008 for Rod Marinelli. Why? Because he's Rod Marinelli's son-in-law. Rod Marinelli, who, if you watch, there's like a 2-hour clip of the media just talking about the Detroit Lions and how shitty they are, and mostly it's just media people defending Rod Marinelli because he is a good man. He is a very good man, Rod Marinelli is. He was the assistant head coach, at Tampa Bay before this, and he finally gets his chance to fucking be the head coach of a football team, but it's the worst one of all time. He does get sandbagged with this too, because as we'll learn, Matt Millen is not long for this job. So the 2008 Lions are historically bad, but who were their best players? Their quarterback was Jon Kitna. He's a 35-year-old quarterback. He had been the QB for the Lions for 2 years to this point, where he had led the league in interceptions in 2007 with 20. And he was the most sacked quarterback with 63 sacks. He was sacked 63 times in 2006 and 50. So they got 13 sacks better in 2007. At the start of his career, he had promise. He was a quarterback for the Seahawks and the Bengals before coming to the Lions. And you know what? He has a lot of weapons to use because here are the two wide receivers he's got spread out there. He's got Roy Williams, who was 27 years old at this point. He's an All-Pro in 2006. He was coming off a shortened year, just played 12 games, but he had 836 yards in those 12 games in 2007. Certainly, the Lions have a great receiving core because they have a 27-year-old Roy Williams, and they have his second year in the league. We have Calvin Johnson, already seen as the best player on the Lions, 6'5", 240 pounds and fucking fast. This guy revolutionized how people think about wide receivers in the NFL. He's like Gronk, almost. Like, Gronk's the best tight end of all time, for sure, but like Calvin Johnson's faster Gronk. They totally could have made this guy a tight end if they wanted to. He's picked second, of course, in the 2007 draft, coming out of Georgia Tech, just a can't-miss prospect. A defensive standout for the Lions is Ernie Sims, who we talked about. He was drafted number 9 by Mr. Matt Millen, 24-year-old outside linebacker, coming off back-to-back 100-tackle seasons. In 2007, he had a combined 134 tackles with 3 forced fumbles. Look at Ernie Sims doing it. Let's talk about the season. I want to talk about some predictions. So most of these predictions were accurate, but there's one good one. So ESPN, who at the time just got a bunch of their prognosticators, of their writers, to just do a bulk pick, and they picked by aggregate. So it's like Bill picked them to be third, Dave picked them to be fourth, Dave picked them to be fourth, Dave picked them to be third, Bill picked them. I don't. There's a lot of Bills and Daves apparently, but anyway, you guys understand. So they just take the average of what everyone picked, and most people just picked the Lions to be last. So that's what ESPN picked. Bleacher Report also picked them to be last, although I believe at that point that website was just fans of the teams and free content, just like everything is, baby. But the special one is Don Banks of Sports Illustrated predicted they would just finish 7-9 again, ahead of my beautiful Chicago Bears. Now, Don Banks wrote this: the Lions didn't do much to inspire buzz in this offseason in terms of personnel moves, and I can't find a reason to change their slot in the NFC North from last year's 7-9 third place finish. While Detroit has looked sharp in the preseason, I sense we're all a little hesitant to buy into another fast start for the Lions, who were 6-2 at the turn in 2007. That's right. In the 2007 season, where they finished 7-9, they started 6-2, and then the wheels fucking fell off the trolley, and they exploded into blood. Without any further ado, let's get to this fucking season, the 2008 season. Now, a fun note on this is the Lions finish 0-16, and the season before, this is, of course, the Patriots finishing 16-0 and then just losing the Super Bowl to the Giants. The over-under for the Lions wins was 6.5 according to Vegas, which makes me think, fuck, I should really take the under on a lot of shitty teams in the sports at the start of the year. The favorite to win the Super Bowl, of course, is New England, and the Cowboys were number 2, which also plays into what happens during this season, oddly. First game they lose to the Falcons. I know they lost. You were like, what? I'm so surprised. You've said they were a winless team 700 times. How did they lose the first game? Well, this is crazy because they kind of get a weird draw here because this is Matt Ryan's first game as a professional quarterback in the NFL. His first pass goes for a touchdown. Michael Turner rushed for over 200 yards. Then Falcons rushing record of 220 yards. They also, the next week, lose 48 to 25 to the Packers, and this is Aaron Rodgers' first road start. So they get the start of the career of Matt Ryan and Aaron Rodgers, two amazing quarterbacks. And the Lions came back from a 21-0 deficit to lead in the fourth quarter and then gave up the most Lions thing of all time, 24 points in 3 minutes. I'd say one of the most damning losses all year that the Lions have is Game 3. They lose 31-13 to the 49ers. Now, why is it a damning loss, you're asking, Dylan? You asked that out loud. You're either listening on headphones, you go, why is it a damning loss, Dylan? Well, because they couldn't beat JT O'Sullivan under Mike Martz. Now, JT O'Sullivan the previous year, not only do we all know JT O'Sullivan from the 19 Super Bowls he's won somehow, and for fucking never throwing an interception and throwing for 19,000 yards every year. But JT O'Sullivan was the backup quarterback of the Lions in the previous year under Mike Martz, who was their offensive coordinator the last year. That's right. This is Jim Coletto's previous the guy who had his job previously was Mike Martz. If you don't know who Mike Martz is, he was the orchestrator of the greatest show on turf, the St. Louis Rams, Kurt Warner, Isaac Bruce, Marshall Faulk, Hakir Hakim, Torrey Bruce, Torrey Holt, Jesus. Fuck, Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt. Now I'm going to fucking someone hit with the car. But then the special thing happens, because after they lose 31-13 to the 49ers, Matt Millen is fired on September 24th. Now, this I think is shitty of them, because they fire Matt Millen. They replace him with Martin Mayhew. They fire Matt Millen, but the team goes... So Matt Millen's entire tenure with the Lions, he finishes 31-84. But really, you can tack an extra 13 losses onto that. So actually, he's 31-97 because he built the team already. This team loses those games. If anything, what Mayhew does is something that everyone would do, which is he just goes harder into it. He commits more to how shitty they're going to be, which we'll talk about. But they fire Matt Millen finally. William Clayford Jr. Sticks his hand out to shake his hand, and then Matt Millen sticks his hand out, and then he just gives him the finger and goes, ha ha, fuck you. And then all the Lions fans throw their own shit at him. Like, they shit in their hand, and they throw it at Matt Millen. And the chief of police is there and goes, I see no crime here, and Matt Millen starts weeping. So that's how that happened. But their next game, I mean, they just got rid of Matt Millen. Clearly, organization-wise, jobs aren't safe here. So if you want to keep your job, you want to have a statement game, and they're against the Bears. They give up 338 yards to Kyle Orton. So I know you're thinking, like, you can't stop Aaron Rodgers. For sure, even as rookies, Aaron Rodgers and Matt Ryan, these guys are fucking awesome. JT O'Sullivan, that's not a good look that JT O'Sullivan's running you over for 31 points. 34 points against the Bears. Kyle Orton, 338 yards, is, of course... You don't even need to know anything about football. The name Kyle Orton doesn't scream champion. The most yards he ever throws for in a game. John Kitna has to leave the game with back spasms, and he's put on injury reserve for the rest of the year. So, baby, we're going to have to get a new quarterback in Detroit. The next game, Game 5, this is probably the closest they get all year to winning an actual football game. This is, of course... Dan Orlovsky's first game as the Detroit Lions starting quarterback. They lose the game 12-10. It has the most replayed play of the Detroit Lions 2008 season, which is Jared Allen is in hot pursuit of Dan Orlovsky, and he drops back. He's on his own one. He drops back so far that he steps out of the back of the end zone. It's a safety early in the game. This is what people... Because they always frame that play as, oh, they're probably down by a bunch. This was early in the game. The Vikings went up 2-0. That was the margin of victory for that game. But the Lions were leading for most of the game. It's just that, like, when you're a winning team in sports, obviously a lot of times the good things happen to you and you end up winning. And the exact opposite is true, of course. When you're a bad team, just bad shit happens and you end up losing. And this is one of the bad things. Game 6, they lose by 7 to the Texans. So they at least are keeping games somewhat close because this is a pretty solid run for them. Game 7 of that year. I should mention, after the Texans game, they're 0-6. Martin Mayhew, honestly a GM move years ahead of its time, says fuck it, just trades Roy Williams to the Cowboys. He traded him for a first, a third, and a sixth. I found articles that called this the worst trade in the history of the Dallas Cowboys because Roy Williams kind of helps the team a bit, but then gets injured, and the rest of his career is kind of nothing. So, good move by Martin Mayhew, and they used that first-round pick to draft Brandon Pettigrew, who is the Lions' tight end during some glory years. We called them glory years. They made the playoffs a couple times with Matthew Stafford at quarterback, of course. 7th game of the year, they lose by 8 to Washington. Megatron catches a 96-yard touchdown pass. 8th game of the year. Of course, they're 0-7. 8th game of the year. They have a real chance to win a football game. You talk about Game 5, and they lose by 2 to the Vikings. This is another real chance they have, because in the 8th game of the year, they lost by 4 to the Bears. This is the first time all year they lead in the first quarter. They knock Kyle Orton, who fucking rattled them, right, for 338 earlier in the year. They knock him, and Rex Grossman is in the game as quarterback. If you guys don't know who Rex Grossman is, basically combine Mark Sanchez with a worse quarterback, and then you get Rex Grossman. This is Rex Grossman. His confidence is gone if you watch the highlights. He's totally fucking rattled. But Rex Grossman actually he doesn't lead the comeback. Matt Forte, the running back for the Chicago Bears, leads the comeback. But Rex Grossman hands him the ball and scores a rushing touchdown. He throws for a touchdown. He, of course, turns the ball over. Even though the Lions only have 4 interceptions all year, of course, Rex Grossman's going to account for one of those fucking interceptions, motherfuckers. So they lose by 4 to the Bears. It's actually a comeback win for the Bears because Rex Grossman cannot be stopped. In the 9th game of the year, they lose 38-14. So the close run is over. So they had how many of these? They lost 2, 7, 8, and 4. So they had 4 straight games where they were pretty close. And then it seems like this is the point in the year where the Lions say, okay, we're done now. We're lying down and we're fucked. They lose by 24, 38-14 to Jacksonville. They sign Dante Culpepper. They sign him. Very important because obviously 38-14, something's got to change. They start fucking Dante Culpepper immediately. The great thing about Dante Culpepper had not been working out, literally was on his couch. They called him and were like, hey, I was playing Madden 2002. You were pretty fucking sick in that game. And he goes, I was. And they're like, we have like Randy Moss, but like he's super buff. Do you want to throw the ball to him? He's like, I could vaguely throw it in the area of where that super buff guy is. So they call Dante Culpepper. He comes into the game. His first fucking play, he immediately throws an interception. They lose by 9 to the Carolina Panthers, 31-22. And it was an all right game, but Culpepper threw a late game interception. Now, 11th game of the year, they actually went up by 17 points on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But then from that point on, they lost 38-3. They lost 38-20 to the Buccaneers. They get blown out the next week, 47-10. Tennessee Titans blow them out. This is the most points the Detroit Lions had ever given up on a Thanksgiving in the history of the franchise. The last game, this is appropriate, the last game Dante Culpepper starts for the Detroit Lions is the 13th game of the year. They lose by 4 to the Vikings. Very appropriate given all those great years that Dante Culpepper had as a member of the Minnesota Vikings. And they go back to Dan Orlovsky the next week. They're 0-13. They're reeling. They look to their young rookie, Dan, can you save us? Dan Orlovsky doesn't at all save them. They lose by 10 to the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the Colts were very good. Peyton Manning, of course, maybe the best quarterback of all time. The next week, they also face one of the better quarterbacks of all time. These are their finishing quarterbacks as they go Manning, Breeze, and Rodgers. And for a team that may have the worst defense of all time, I mean, I haven't looked into it, but I'm just going to say that because fuck it. That's not good. But it's not like if you're making Kyle Orton look good, then Peyton Manning may have to just play like a third of the downs in the game. But they go back to Orlovsky. Game 15, they get blown out by 35 against the Saints. And this really highlights what I was talking about earlier, how Matt Millen, if you're going to fire him, fuck it, but he owes it to that team to stick around and take these questions because Rod Marinelli is taking a fucking beating from the press. One of the press, the mood is somber, and I've been this guy before. If you watch the clip, it looks really brutal, but I've been this guy before where a dude in the press tries to lighten the mood and says, do you wish, this is a question he asked, do you wish your daughter had married a better defensive coordinator? Now, Rod Marinelli is so sad. This is like you're trying to make a joke when a guy's definitely going to lose his job and may never work in the NFL again because he has so much stink on him from coaching a winless team, maybe. This is the 15th game of the year. They have 1 week left to fucking win a game. And he asked him this question. And the worst part about it is Rod Marinelli doesn't even like come back and go, why don't you come up? Like the head coach thing where they do like high school, college, the pros, they all do this. Football coaches especially, they go, what you want to try and coach these men are amazing. You want to try and coach a team, buddy? You ever coached a professional? No. Last time you were picked was when you were picked last in volleyball or whatever. But he just is sad. It's super shitty to watch. He's just fucking sad, and then everyone they should have just stopped it because he just took another question, and the other question was like, "I'm sorry, Rod." It was crazy. 16th game of the year, the Packers fans are really going in on them. They lose by 10, of course, to the Green Bay Packers. The Packers fans are really going in on them, and it's like, just leave them alone, man. Like, every time the Packers scored a touchdown, they should have just been like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, man." And then just, we need this win because whatever. And also the Packers, you're thinking, oh, the Aaron Rodgers Packers. This is the first year Aaron Rodgers is there. They won this game. They beat the Lions twice in the season. They finished 6-10. This wasn't a particularly strong division, as you can tell, because the Vikings barely beat them. The Vikings were actually one of the better teams in this division. I think they won the division this year. Gus Frerott's their quarterback. So here are the quarterbacks that they're playing twice in this year. Kyle Orton, who one game got injured, and they had to face Rex Grossman. Aaron Rodgers, obviously amazing. He had a great first year. Like, he comes in. Aaron Rodgers doesn't come in as just a rookie. He comes in with seasoning and anger and ready to prove something. But they're 6-10, the Packers are. And then you get Gus Frerotte, who is responsible for one of the greatest clips in NFL history, where to celebrate a touchdown, he just ran head first into a brick wall and gave himself a huge concussion. The total leads they had all year, the 0-16 Detroit Lions, they had 6 leads all year. They led 6 times. They, of course, their biggest loss was by 37 to the Titans. And now let's talk about what makes them truly amazing. The lowlights. Now, we're going to have a fascinatingly little amount of lowlights when it comes to their offense. No, I'm going to start with the lowlights. You know what? It might be more fun to talk about what they did well. Because, all right, here's what they did well. They had 18 passing touchdowns, which might not sound like a lot, because it's not. It's barely over a passing touchdown per game. Calvin Johnson caught 12. He led the league in touchdown passes from 3 different quarterbacks. An old, dusty Dante Culpepper, who just was like, "You giving me $50 to throw a football? I'll fucking throw a goddamn football." Dan Orlovsky, who, God bless him, immediately wasn't in the NFL again. And John Kitna, who led the league in interceptions, whatever. He was getting sacked a ton, but he's not the best quarterback in the world. So he has like 3 so-so quarterbacks, and he's still caught 12 touchdown passes. And to build a rapport between a receiver and a quarterback is a huge thing in the NFL. And it just didn't matter. It was like, I'll just throw the ball there. You just run whatever route you want because fuck it, we're going to be shit anyway. 18 passing touchdowns. Calvin Johnson caught 12. Now, they were down in a bunch of games, so you get free yards because the defense essentially stops playing occasionally. They were 25th in expected points on offense. The Bengals were last. So that's good. That's great. They only had the 5th most punts in the league. The Bengals had 11 more. So the Bengals were shit. And look at this. They had a better SRS, which is a simple rating system, minus 13.11. That was better than the St. Louis Rams. So they're better than the Bengals. They're better than the Rams. The unstoppable Detroit Lions. If you look at the adjusted wins expected from their offense and defense, they were at 2 wins. 2-14. I mean, it's still terrible, but whatever. Now the lowlights. And the lowlights are mostly the offense. All right. Here is where they were worst in the league. They were worst in the league in rushing touchdowns against. They gave up 5.1 yards per rush. They gave up the most first downs against. They gave up the most points, 517. 6.4 yards overall per play. They only had 4 interceptions, as was mentioned earlier. They gave up 7.9 yards per play, full stop. And they gave up 2,754 yards on the ground. They almost gave up 3,000 yards rushing. They had the least pass attempts against them. This is crazy. They had, because you're thinking like, the rush, it sounded like they were really bad against the rush. You have to understand they were also losing a lot of these games. So people were just going to run on them against. They had the least pass attempts against. They were still 5th worst against the pass. That's insane. They had the least offensive play attempts, the least first downs, of course. An opposing quarterback rating of 110. To put that in perspective, Tom Brady, 3 times in his career, has had a quarterback rating over 110. And JT O'Sullivan, and this is with Rex Grossman was 8 of 18 with a pick against them. That's how bad they were. They allowed over 400 yards of total offense 9 times, and one of those times doesn't count. So 7 times they didn't allow 400 yards offense, but 392 and 384 yards against as well. So basically 11 times they had over 400 yards offense. They had given up over 100 yards rushing in 15 of the 16 games and over 200 4 times. Now, the kicker on the all-time Lions team is Jason Hanson, and he fucking makes his fucking presence known because they were 21 of 22 in field goals. Fuck yeah. I don't know if you can trade a kicker in the NFL because you can't in Madden games, but they should have fucking traded fucking Jason Hanson for 17 first-round picks. Fuck it. Fucking Sam Presti this shit. We have 600 first-round picks, Jason Hanson. Sign him for 35 years at fucking $700 million a year. Jason Hanson's automatic. He's a kicker. He doesn't need to run. You have to saunter up and then fucking... I wonder when he's deteriorated too much. He can't kick far. Aftermath. Rod Marinelli, this is crazy, was fired. He was fired by the Detroit Lions. He took a year off, and then he was later the defensive coordinator for the Bears. The Bears had great defenses. So Rod Marinelli lands on his feet. Joe Barry, old Rod's son-in-law, became a defensive coordinator. Sorry, after that, he was a linebackers coach for the Chargers for a while. Then he became a defensive coordinator again for Washington and was fifth last in total yards both years he was there. They did win in the division in 2015, but Joe Barry, I wonder how good this guy is with linebackers. The people are like, let's try him as defensive coordinator again. Like, is he just like amazing with linebackers? He made Ernie Sims amazing. And then once it gets to the like defensive backs, he's like, okay, stand on the goal line and just try and be as big as possible. He's the guy who would actually hire the world's fattest man to be a goalie in ice hockey. Jim Coletto, of course, never coached again. Matt Millen never worked in the front office for an NFL team again. But he is still a personality on the NFL Network occasionally, and he'll still like criticize people. And it's just like, you just want people to, yeah, didn't you draft a guy who didn't play football for a year over a guy who was an all-pro? Yeah, but other people told me to. Like, how can you take this dude seriously? That's like, oh my God, who is it? There's like so many of these prognosticators who are just fucking terrible at their job and still criticize people. If that was my football team, here's what I'd do. First thing I'd do is I would experiment with drugs on the sidelines. Like, who cares? John Kitna went to the Dallas Cowboys, where he finished his career. He posted somewhat of a comeback season, throwing that ball to Roy Williams. Who cares? Dan Orlovsky was out of the NFL for a year before coming back as a backup in Houston, Indianapolis, Tampa Bay, and finishing his career with the wonderful Detroit Lions. 2008 was the last full season Ernie Smith played as he bounced around the league before retiring at 29. Jim Schwartz took over as head coach of the Detroit Lions after this year and had a fucking comeback season of 2-14. He achieved those expected wins. Motherfuckers. Fuck you. Jim Schwartz for life. He also led the team to the playoffs. It was a steady climb to the playoffs in 2011 because their reward for finishing 0-16 was the shining light, the man who is still the Detroit Lions quarterback, Matthew fucking Stafford. They have Matthew Stafford. They have Calvin Johnson. They have Brandon Pettigrew. They're good. They were a good team in the 2010s. And really the takeaway from this is, isn't it better to just be all around memorable for being shitty rather than just being kind of shitty? That is a big thing that's going on in the NBA right now, is there's a debate like, would you rather have a team that's fucking wins 3 games all year, 3-79, or would you rather have a team that was pretty good with some veterans who competes every night? I think I'd rather have 3-79. I'd rather be like, man, if enough people get injured, I could fucking play, and I'd get dunked on, and I'd be like, well, it looks bad, but it looks, at least I got to some exercise, That concludes the first episode of Remarkable Teams. This name is dorkier every single time I say it, but thank you very much for listening, guys. If you like the episode, then contact me at Dylan Gott on Twitter, at Dylan Gott on Instagram. I'll probably have a Twitter for this podcast because fuck it, I need another follower, and who cares if I'm the one who's controlling that account? Booyah. So at Remarkable Teams on Twitter and Instagram. You can email me. It's Dylan at dylangott.net, Dylan at dylangott.net. And if you guys want, tweet at me, tweet at the team, tweet at the podcast account with suggestions for teams, because I always would love to research stuff. I don't know much about college sports. If you're in the States, email me some college sports shit, and I'll try and research those. The unpaid labor, best unpaid labor teams of all time. But yeah, if you like the show, rate and subscribe, give a 5-star review on iTunes, and then write "was good." Don't need to put a bunch of stuff in there. Just good. Thanks so much for listening, and fuck off. Calvin Johnson ended up retiring with one of the greatest careers of any wide receiver ever. His 12 touchdown catches that year, he actually only surpassed that 3 more times in his career. His career high for touchdown receptions in a season was 16. He did finish one year with 1,964 yards receiving, truly one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. He finished with over 11,000 yards receiving total in his career, even though he retired at the age of just 30. Right now, Calvin Johnson is 35. Calvin Johnson could probably pull a Dante Culpepper, get off the couch, and be a fantastic receiver in the NFL.